Herb, are we ready back there? Good.
Okay, thank you.
Not right now, I can't guarantee I make it.
Welcome. Today is Monday, October 10th, 2016, and this is the Waunakee Community School District Board of Education regular meeting. We started at 6:30 and went into closed session. Came back into open session about 10 minutes ago. It's 7 o'clock right now, so it's time to start our meeting. You will see in your packet, first of all, the minutes of your September 12th, 2016 meeting for your review and approval. Actually, there was an updated copy of that provided in front of you tonight. And what's highlighted was a changing in wording for one of the actions that was taken. That is the only change in the minutes. So if everything looks fine, then we're looking for a motion to approve of the minutes, these modified minutes as presented.
I move we approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Motion carried. Is there any change to the agenda other than the staff changes?
Nope, as presented.
Motion to approve the agenda and additions.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Item 7, this is a time for public comments. Are there any individuals who wish to present or share something with the board? We provide this opportunity for everyone to provide input on items on the evening's agenda so that you can share your thoughts, or 4 times a year we also have an opportunity for you to share thoughts with the board on any other item as it relates to the operations of the school district. What I would like to do is we have some individuals joining us tonight, special guests for part of our meeting, and Mr. Wade Hansen, if you could please tell us a little bit about this group.
We're from Troop 46. I'm coming up to the mic. Actually, I should have one of the scouts do this.
Ah, okay, well, whatever.
All right, good volunteer. Outstanding.
Speaking badge.
You can introduce yourselves or tell us who you are and why you're here tonight.
My name is Ben Prutka, and we are here because we need for the Citizenship in the Nation merit badge, and one of the requirements for that merit badge is to participate in not participate, but observe a school board meeting, and basically write notes about it, and then incorporate that into our merit badge work.
Oh, wow, very neat.
Welcome.
Well, welcome to our meeting. And we have 4 individuals here, or 5 individuals actually joining us.
1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
Where's somebody's hiding?
Right behind
Oh,
us.
way down. Okay, I see her. Yep,
There we go.
okay. Hi there.
That's my trouble.
Okay, well, welcome.
Yeah.
Hope you find this interesting.
So I believe you're going to be here for part of our meeting, and then you'll be dismissing to do some serious work in the back conference room.
Yeah, I want to thank the board for recognizing the scouts and that too. Yeah, we'll be here till about 8 p.m. We'll get a couple of the agenda items that you have from a discussion standpoint, then adjourn to one of the conference rooms and discuss it. And so they pick a topic and then they discuss it with the whole group. And so we write that down as part of this is citizenship in the community. So
Great.
thank you.
Great.
And I almost said I when you guys.
And
Thanks, Wade.
for those of you who do not know, Wade Hansen is a former member of our Board of Education, and thank you very much, appreciate it. Okay, on to item 8, administrative reports, starting with our student reports. Amanda and Michaela.
Okay, so we're from student council, as you guys know. So just some things that have been going on. For homecoming week last week, we did Spirit Chains, which is a competition between all 4 grades, and we raised money to see who can get the most amount of chains. It was like 1 for $1 or $5 for 7. So then we build the chains, and then at the prep day, we see how long each chain is, and then whoever wins, we split the money. Student council gets half, and then their class will get half. So we raised about $800 for it,
Wow.
and we also had a chain for Isabel Denai, and hers was the longest chain, so she'll be getting all that money donated to her too. So
Yes, so that was a big event we had last week going on, and probably our next biggest event will be our Trick or Can, which is gonna be Halloween night this year. In the past, we've done it like the morning after, but we found that just doing it the night of Halloween works best because people are already expecting people to come to their doors, and we put flyers out in the mail so you're aware. But then we just collect non-perishable items, and that goes to the food pantry.
and then another event that we'll be doing in October and November will be a volleyball tournament. We're gonna try to get this money donated to Isabel too. So it'll be like $35 for a team, and then like it's usually pretty successful because it's like we have multiple teams, and then there's a tournament that goes on, and that's always a good way to raise a lot of money. So hopefully we can get that going too.
Mm-hmm. And then every team like dresses up and does like the cute little theme, so people really like it. And another thing that's kind of like a social event in the school is open mic night, and we had probably 2 or 3 last year. And those are really fun because people who have like hidden talents almost they just kind of they sign up. It's like a pretty relaxed environment. You can come up and just sing, dance, whatever you want to do. You don't even have to have a talent. You can just come up and read poetry, anything you want. So it's a lot of fun. There's bake sale items, like it's fun time. So.
And then just like one more event that we're doing, we're gonna do a blood drive. Usually in the previous years we've only done it in the spring, but this year we're gonna try to do 2 of them, and we're gonna try to do one soon.
In the
like
winter.
yeah, in the winter, and then we're gonna try to do one in the spring too. So hopefully that will get more people to come donate.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. But we're gonna be having another meeting soon and try to get some more ideas for student council.
Sounds like a lot. Any questions for our reps?
How was homecoming dance? Did you have a good
It
time?
was a lot of
Mhm,
fun.
It was fun.
Good.
Sad it was the last one, but.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your
Thanks, ladies.
reports.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Item B, board reports, starting with any board members willing or interested in sharing any educational events, meetings, or trainings they might have attended since our last meeting. Julie?
I went to 2 things. I went to the presentation last week, Amalia's Hope, that was put on for the entire community in combination with the Waunakee Cares Coalition that's getting going, and it was 2 mothers that gave very heartfelt presentations on what it was like to deal with children dealing with drugs. And so I was really pleased to see it was a fairly decent community turnout, and there were student representatives from the Above the Influence Coalition there as well. And I thought the question and answer session at the end was particularly helpful, well done, and I think it was an excellent opportunity for community to ask questions. Officer Peterson was there from the Waunakee Police Department, and I hope we can get the discussion up and running now and extend this on. I hope this is not a one and done kind of thing. It was very encouraging to see the community engaged. And then I also attended the Regional 12 school board meeting last week with Peggy and Jack, where our Region 12 gets together and discusses issues pertinent to going on. It was good legislative update, and the featured presentation was a discussion with accountability, and so all well timed, and glad I went.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah?
Yeah, as Julie said, I attended the Region 12 meeting, and it was a great opportunity to network with other school board members from around the region, come up with different ideas on how they run their meetings, and we sat with the Middleton and Marshall people, and good thought, good discussion.
It's always a great benefit of any of those gatherings of other school board members. Any other comments? Mark?
Just wanted to compliment Randy and Dan for the terrific job they did with the open house for Heritage, as well as Chris and Tim and Randy for the intermediate function on Sunday. Both events, it's fun just walking around and listening to the community share their delight in what's taken place, and former board members, and particularly at the Heritage, hearing some of the old stories about now what was here and how. I mean, I had no idea there were that many add-ons prior to my time, and so I learned actually quite a bit that night about what was prior to my time, and so that was fun. And but just seeing the positive reaction. Kudos to Kathy Bartling on the music presentation and the way her kids performed. It was just a delight to see them excited, creative, and it was just a wonderful event.
Dave?
I went to both the open houses too, and they were very well done. The one comment, well, there were a lot of good comments from people, especially at the new intermediate school, talking about how they love the design. A few people talking about, what's this giant staircase for? But the one comment I did hear that might be a question of signage was, why are there so many resource people, and what does a resource do?
Yes.
And I mean, having them all titled that same thing, obviously I think the parents and public in general were very confused by that,
Right.
but I'm sure it's not as confusing if you're in the school every day.
That was a comment that I had a gentleman and his wife spent about 10 minutes with me talking about what is resource, trying to have a definition of it. So I don't know if that was the same person you spoke to, but it.
No, I
it
had
was-
two women come up and
Yeah.
started talking about it,
Yeah.
and I was trying to explain
Yeah.
what little I know.
That's a good point.
Couple more stuff. I'll just echo, add to a couple of the comments. Yeah, I went to both open houses as well, and will just say that it was wonderful. I mean, the comments from some of the people who went to high school at the old Heritage Elementary, and I mean, it's elementary now, and one in the old high school. It was just amazing to hear some of those old stories. I think if everybody who was at the open house for the intermediate school, I mean, I shared some of my thoughts and comments similar to what Dave just did, and maybe a simple kind of frequently asked questions or things that, you know, in the future in terms of, oh, that's what this is for, would be helpful, because sometimes you get so close to it and you forget what it's like, you know, to be just entering the school building for the first time. What I did appreciate with the intermediate school open house also, first of all, yes, kudos to Kathy. I mean, I brought tears to my eyes, one of the songs she wrote for those children. And also, one of the pieces was a welcome, you know, and thank you, which was, I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful. But it was great to see the number of people. I mean, I think there was a constant flow of, I mean, the backup on Woodland at the beginning was evident of the number of people who were going to attend. It was a nice representation of all the communities for which we serve, and so it was very, very interesting. So, any other comments that anybody wants to share? Okay, on to item 2. You'll see this is just on an annual basis. At this time, we just kind of do a quick review of how we're doing against our board governance goals. In your package, you had a copy of the governance goals that we approved in April. And I guess what I'm happy to say is that we are making progress on almost everything that's on here. In terms of our goals for, in the vision area, we are evaluating our regular board meeting agendas and committee structures. Well, not the committee structures necessarily at this point, but we are having discussions at the committee level, which will ultimately possibly have an influence on the roles of each of those committees. But the agendas for sure, and they'll be evidenced by some other things we'll be doing tonight for the first time. In the area of accountability, in goals, the Region 12 meeting, of course, was, as was already indicated, is Chapter 2 in our key works book was really the focus of that presentation. And so later, in item number 2, we are going to be talking a bit more in our HR meeting about the new superintendent evaluation process. And we already did make a decision at the July meeting in terms of the board self-evaluation to use the same tool we did last year. When we were at the Region 12 meeting, I did receive, it's being offered free again. So that tool that we did last year for the self-evaluation is available again for this year. So we've got when it comes time to starting that process, everybody will get a password and be able to take that online survey again, and we'll go through the same process we did last year for that. We have a policy meeting coming up in terms of the area of policy. And it's in community leadership, I think the 2016 goals, it's on the agenda. It continues to be on the agenda. And this is an area where I really appreciate Randy's leadership also moving this forward. Randy and I had a discussion with Dave on the developing relationships with legislators and legislative advocacy, and that's going to be a topic as part of either a regular meeting or a special meeting at some point, just to kind of share some insights given his former life in that area in advocacy and basically engaging with legislators on a more regular basis. We'll hear more on what we're doing in the community engagement listening session. And the board superintendent relationships, we're going to hear more on all of those as well. So I guess net, I mean, we identified several areas in terms of board development goals when we went through the process last time. I believe we're making progress on some of the areas based on what's currently in place. I guess there are any individuals that have any questions or concerns about what's on here and may disagree with some of the progress that's being made. So that's the October update. And we'll find out if we accomplish them later in next May or April. Okay, on to strategic planning. Randy.
And just a couple things before we walk through. This is the first meeting where we're really trying to take a little bit different approach. We've been stepping through this for the last few months with talking about how to really organize some of our work around the table to be more specific to our strategic planning objectives. And tonight you will see 4 different reports coming forward. One's a follow-up on community engagement, which we've been doing for the last number of months. Second is the Third Friday Count, which is really a precursor report to something you'll see in December, where we start looking at our long-range facility needs and how our student count is lining up with some of our other projections. Third is internal controls, which is, again, a follow-up. You heard something about that from Steve last year. We're bringing that piece back as he's really put more of his plans together and some timelines with it. And then a STEAM report. What our objectives are to really continue to work through our strategic planning framework and to bring back pertinent reports each month, some of which may have actionable items, some of which, like tonight's, do not have anything actionable. But as you will see as they're moving forward and as we're talking about them, there are pieces of them that all will have some part that will need to have some decision making around the table at some point in the future, be it when we come to budget time or a future recommendation that will be coming at a subsequent school board meeting. The reports that you see tonight are very different. I mean, some of these are going to be more updates as far as what we've done. Some are very focused in scope as far as the internal controls piece. And the STEAM piece is really one to just unpack what is STEAM, so you have an understanding of what are some of the different pieces that we are doing without really diving too far into all the details on each of the 6 to 8 items that Tim will highlight. So tonight is really our first foray into this format. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do, and I'm going to hand these out try and do this at every board meeting, is I've really created a feedback sheet on the reports that we provide each month so that we can see what's helpful to you, what information that you'd like to see in the future, if there's something that we can improve upon. But it gives you an opportunity as we're going through our different strategic planning work that you can provide us some feedback if you choose to do so. That will help us to then gear future reports and future iterations of our strategic planning work with you to really try and meet the needs that you have. So that's really what our objective is. So to start off with, we're going to move into the community engagement report. So if you can pull that one up, Rebecca. This is one that we've been working on since the summer, and we really started discussing some of the feedback we had from our different listening sessions, from our linkage meeting a year or so ago, and other feedback mechanisms that we even received during the referendum, as far as how does our community want us to really interact and engage with them on different areas. What I thought to really kind of illustrate that the type of work that we're trying to do, I thought I would embed it within really what I've titled our Board of Education 90 Days Plus Outlook. What was a little scary to me was how quickly I got to March. And I was realizing that time was moving pretty quickly already, and we're sitting here in October. So just to really kind of walk through, you see all the dates that we have in October. October is always a very busy month for us. Obviously, we're sitting here this evening. We have our annual meeting coming up next Monday, which is a very important piece as we start to really set our budget for the year. For those in the audience, school boards and school districts have a very interesting budget cycle. We start spending our funds on July 1st, but you don't finalize your budget or set your levy till October and November timeframes. So that's really what the purpose of our annual meeting is and what our special meeting is on October 24th. I will continue to update this in subsequent months just to show us where our committees will be meeting. But when you take a look through our October timeframes, the board's quite busy all the way through here. We have negotiations with our WTA. At the time that I wrote this, I didn't have the date. I believe it's the 19th. So that should be filled in as well. The other piece the items that are underlined are ones that we talked about last month as really making some commitments to really wanting to move forward with different levels of engagement. The board for the last number of years has done listening sessions with staff. So this is one piece that we're working to establish again this year. The one that you will notice that has changed is this was obviously written before we had the modification to the one that was going around. So the correct date, Rebecca, for the middle school would be, do you know what that is offhand?
November 11th.
November 11th, thank you. So all of these, the remainder ones are the same. Middle school is November 11th. But that was our first iteration as far as one of the pieces that we talked about last month. We start to move through October, November. I think the pieces that I see, we have a few board committee meetings that we've already set in that time frame. We also have Thanksgiving week occurring in there. November board meeting is November 14th. The piece that I wanted to just highlight there is that's when we'll be bringing forward our staff salary increases for 16-17 school year. So that'll be an important piece as we're kind of putting all of our pieces of our budget together here in the next month and then making some decisions on some of our staff compensation. The piece I wanted to talk to you about tonight and get some feedback from is, I believe, with one of the other aspects that we committed to last month was looking at a linkage meeting or a connection with the community. Following up on what Julie was saying with regards to the meeting we had, the parent and community involvement meeting around Amalia's Hope and some of the drug and alcohol type issues that we were having a community conversation around. As I've talked to different folks, to Kurt Ely, Brian Kirsten, some of the folks who were present at the event the other night, I talked to Julie briefly. One of the things that we want to do is make sure we continue to have a conversation moving forward around that topic. One of the things I think the school district holds is we hold some of the data. We hold data on what some of our students' behaviors are, some of the issues that we are dealing with our kids, and I think that this would be a great time for us to really hold a linkage meeting as a follow-up to some of the work that's already taken place. I'm recommending that we assign a work group from the board, it could be one of our committees, to work in conjunction with some of the staff that work with Kurt Ely and our student services staff to really plan that meeting, and also bring in some of the folks from the Waunakee Cares Coalition to help us to kind of formulate that conversation. So I think it can accomplish a few different things. One, a connection for us with the community, certainly around the data that we have for students. We have some things that we believe as a school district that we can tighten up and help with as we're looking at future budget requests that may help us in the whole area of alcohol and drug abuse, but also student mental health, which we think fits in here, and then broadening the conversation with the community around this topic, particularly since we've had some additional, I guess, dialogue around this, and I agree with Julie, we had about 75 people there at the meeting, which was probably 5 times more than we've had at any of our past iterations in the past years. So my recommendation would be and I'd like some feedback from the board around a December linkage meeting around AODA and mental health. Just moving through, and then we'll come back to this one. Getting through basically the holiday and Christmas break area, you can see that we'll obviously fill that in as we move closer to that, but planning for that December linkage meeting, if we decide to move in that direction, will take some work over the next month to really pull off. If you can scroll down. There were 2 other things that I wanted to follow up on just timing wise. One is the governor's budget should be released sometime in January, probably towards the end of January. We'll then have an opportunity to see how that impacts us as a school district. I think that falls in very well with then a conversation meeting that we could have with the Board of Education, our administrative team, and our teacher leadership team on the budget. I think that would serve as an opportunity for Steve to really present what that outlook looks like, what are some of the projections, and how does it impact us as a school district. It also falls in a timeline that is when we are starting to see what our budget requests are for this next budget cycle, and we can be bringing some of those forward for discussion. So the hope of that meeting would be, 1, to be informative on what the impact is of the proposed state budget, 2, to see what are some of the needs and thoughts that we have as a district for moving objects forward, and then 3, to have some dialogue with really a larger leadership group of our school district around all of those topics. And then that would be the precursor meeting to really us putting together the other pieces of the budget as we move into the spring. The last piece, I talked to Aaron May with regards to he's doing a co-curricular handbook code review this year. And one of the things I thought that as we've had some discussions around this table is how can we kind of forward that discussion with regards to some of the discussions we've had with the role of co-curriculars, and just some of that dialogue that we just really need to have a roundtable discussion around. I think given that he's putting some work in this fall to be pulling some of that information together, we felt that sometime in the March timeframe would be an opportunity to share some information that he is having, also get some feedback, and then open up a broader dialogue around some of those topics. So when I take a look through what are some of the major milestones that I would see for the next number of months here leading up to spring break, those are the things that have really come to that have come to mind to help us moving the discussion forward that we started over the last few months. So with that, I guess I'd first of all just like to see what your thoughts are on really the 4 underlined items, and as far as their placement within our work scheme this year. Does that seem as a reasonable time frames? I did run those past our administrative team to get their input, and they seem to feel that those fit within kind of the work scope that we would be looking at administratively. But I'd also like to hear from the board as far as their placement and your first thoughts on that.
And this is also related to our expectation that we wanted to have several special topic board meetings this year in terms of increasing our awareness on certain areas. Yeah, Mark.
I like what I see. I think the timing makes sense. I mean, it looks reasonable to achieve. And it's, I don't know how big an issue it is. The thing I'm not seeing, we've removed from the agendas all the curriculum
Yes, I did not,
sharing.
that's a good point, I did miss that.
And it's looking like, I mean, that's 2 more meetings that we said we we're gonna have, and I don't know where we're gonna put those.
No.
And because we're already up to how many, so.
Right. And so,
Now, and what the places that those would fall would probably be in the January timeframe,
okay,
and then probably like in April.
April, okay.
As you spread those out and you kind of look at what
Yep,
those are.
yep, yep.
But I think when we start to look at, when I look back at the previous year that we finished up, we had a number of special meetings. And I think what I like about the kind of outline these well ahead of time is it allows us to be more purposeful on when those fall and put some specific topics to them that we can plan towards. I think in other respects, we were kind of reactionary to things that were in front of us. We needed special meetings to address. Not saying that that won't ever happen, because that certainly can, but I appreciate you bringing those forward, because I just didn't add those in. But I would look at those potentially in January or April. Yeah, Julie.
Well, it's good that we've got a rough timeline. I guess I'm a little disappointed that the community engagement meeting, the first one we have planned, to me, December, feels like we've slipped it already. So I guess I'm a little concerned. I would encourage us to try to find a date as soon as possible, knowing that December does get crowded with school programs and a bunch of other things. And then to remind the community, I mean, this is designed, at least my understanding, to be two-way communication. So
Right.
yes, there's some things we want to share in terms of the results from the Dane County Youth Survey, but we are also needing input in terms of
That's
ways we can better support, engage, and link together other aspects and resources from the community.
Agreed.
What really did impress me with the 2 women that led the presentation last week was the courage it takes to share those personal stories. And unless we can be open and forthcoming, and I know that's a very, very difficult thing to do, but making those stories real and sharing what's really going on is what's going to help us address the real problems. We can't pretend it's other people's kids, those kids, bad kids, kids from this kind of home, that kind of home. It's students, it's people. We are all in this and dealing with this together, so I'm hoping we can get some honest dialogue back and forth with that meeting.
Agreed. I think the timing of it, Julie, can be determined on how quickly we can get together to plan it.
Yeah.
And I think what that is, and that would kind of go back to, I guess, the question that I have is, I would like a committee of the board to really hold on to that, and then I would like to work with Kurt to bring some of his staff who work in that area, so we have more of a expanded work group around it. And that may include some of our social workers, psych, some of those folks. I'd like Brian Kirsten, we may grab someone from the CARES Coalition, to really have a dialogue on how can we put together a meaningful discussion. Because I think what I heard at the meeting that you and I were at, Julie, was there's been a lot of talk, but we need to have some action
Yes,
pieces.
exactly.
So I would like to have us start to think about how can we plan that. So there has to be some sharing of information, but then we need to find a way that we can start to get to
Do something.
feedback and something actionable out of it. And so if we can have a larger group kind of planning that, so it's not just the board in isolation or the committee in
I agree.
isolation, I think that'd be really helpful. But if we can pull that meeting together, that's gonna precipitate, what I see then is them finding the time that they think would be best. And then my rationale for looking at December was if we wanted to bring something back at our November board meeting to say, here's kind of here's kind of our concept, here's kind of how we're gonna roll this out, and then give some forethought to it. So it can occur as soon as we achieve all of that.
Jack?
I think Mark was,
My question is, could we, you got a TBD or TBA up there, could we tentatively circle the first week of December so that it's not interfering with the holiday functions, programs that go on
Yeah.
during the school year, or possibly, on Monday, Wednesday, so it's not affecting the co-curricular programming either.
Right.
I just, to leave it out there, all of a sudden we pick the third week of December and,
Right.
because that's what fits best, and it's getting people to come on top of their other activities could be challenging.
Sure.
This question I have is, who is driving this meeting? Was it the school district, or was it the CARE organization? Who,
The one last week,
yeah,
Brian is part of the Waunakee Cares Coalition,
Right.
and he always tries to do something approaching homecoming week or prom week
Right.
to, so I think he
Yeah.
coordinated it with that group, but it was a community group, and it was, the one gal was, she was from the state of Wisconsin, but she was a mom from another place.
Right. What we've done this is normally something Brian does twice a year.
Yeah.
He does something right around homecoming, right around prom. And so he's, in the past, probably 3-4 years, we've brought in a parent component or a community component. We've just had a hard time the last few years getting people there. So in conjunction with the Waunakee Cares Coalition and working with some of the ecumenical community and working with the police department, we've been able to get a larger audience. And that's really what precipitated that. Brian kind of chaired that meeting the other night as far as kind of being the MC for the events and helping to and trying to get the panel discussion going. So yeah, it was kind of pushed it was instituted by the school. What we're trying to do is make it a community conversation as opposed to solely a school function. Where I see a linkage piece here that I think comes together is you're starting to see more community groups bring attention to this and come around the table with it. And I think that's exciting. I think the role we have is being able to provide some richer data, because I think that there's still some of that information that's not well known as far as what's actually occurring and what's going on with some of our students, not only from a drug and alcohol aspect, but also from a student mental health aspect, and we see those as very closely linked. And that this would be an opportunity to really have us be able to share those pieces and then work together with some of that group to really create an engaging night around that topic, hopefully then to either spark some action, help move some further direction forward with the CARES Coalition. And I think there's some things that we have to consider as we look at some of our needs as a district that services kids and some of the things that we've identified as potentially missing. So.
And that thing with the county, that's also, that we just
Right.
approved being a potential participant in then building bridges, is that what it's
Building
called?
bridges
Okay.
program.
I mean, there's just a lot of energy around
Right.
this topic.
That fits right in
that's- Okay, that's happening, and to kind of bring them together. Jack?
I would be a little cautious, while I support this, I'd be a little cautious, because once the school gets involved and takes more of a leadership role, now you don't have the community engagement anymore. It's kind of a school problem. But this is, it would be nice if the CARE group takes the lead and we kind of support with data, which I think we really do. So that would be my concern, as it moves forward. Because you want the community involved.
I get it, that is the point, yeah.
And, when we do it, then the community just kind of pushes it and says, okay, the school district's taking care of it now, and, you might, we spend a lot of time, and we've got these kids for a period of time, but they're in the community, that period of time as well. So, the churches and the police department, all of these people start backing away, once we start getting totally involved.
I think the challenge, Jack, has been, one, there hasn't been general awareness of what's been going on. Two, I think that when things occur, it often comes back to school as far as, well, what does the school do? Because it usually comes to us through some sort of disciplinary measure. It's where it really comes in front of us. I think the piece that we do have, I completely agree that it has to be a community conversation. I think we do have a role in helping to formulate that community conversation. And if that means that we're creating it around what I'm titling here as a linkage meeting, I think the linkage piece is then helping to create those pieces to say, school can do so much. What is the community also doing? And how do we bring that CARES Coalition? The exciting piece that I saw after last week's program was the number of people who signed up wanting to be more informed. So you had a whole sheet on a legal pad of people with names and emails and addresses. That's part of what that group needs, is to get more of that type of thing. And I think we can help with that. And then it's really then it's a group piece, because I think sometimes we as a school feel like you're kind of in it in silos. You got parents who don't know where to go. You got school who's dealing with it as the school issues, and you've got law enforcement dealing with it from their aspect. And if we can bring folks around the table to start talking about how does this come together as a whole unit, I think that's an opportunity that right now is ripe for the conversation. So that would be my piece. I agree that we don't want it to own it solely, but we have to be part of
I would say
it.
the village should own it, and we'd be the support people, behind that,
Well, our communities, not just the village.
or communities.
I mean, is the CARES Coalition, is that a formal group? I mean, is there somebody who, I won't say heads, I mean, is kind of a key contact or facilitator, or?
Yes, I'm trying to,
Well, the only, I mean, it's, the only,
Jody Sorensen.
okay, because I'm wondering if, one way of presenting or positioning this particular linkage meeting is to say, hey, we noticed that there were a lot of people who were interested and engaged, and, we've got some stuff that we want to also share,
Right.
and this is what we're talking about. What are her thoughts, and maybe pulling,
I agree.
maybe that's the, I mean, is she aware, or that group aware that we're?
Yes,
Okay,
I
yeah.
talked to her on Wednesday night last week.
Mhm.
And I think that's part
Okay,
of
got
what
it.
that's part of what can be planned through this planning group, is to start to bring up some of the concerns that Jack has, and to think about how can we structure it. But I think this does two things. One, it gives us an opportunity to really engage on a pressing topic we've all been struggling with. And two, it's one that can bring community truly around an issue that I think we can hopefully look at some community solutions to, some of which I also see as we're looking at it internally that we would like to share with the board as things that we see that we can help. Part of that's like the Building Bridges program, but I know the coalition is looking for things that they can forward as well. One of the pieces that came out of the meeting that Julie was at was a hotline type of a place where you can call if you're having an issue, one of your loved ones is having an issue, where do you go to? Because that doesn't exist or readily exist in our community right now.
Okay, so to get to your specific question at this point is, should there be either one of the committees of the board or several individuals
Right.
that might be interested in just working together to put this,
That's my question.
okay.
That's yes, that's the question that I'd like, is I'd like to have a committee or a group from the board to really be part of a larger, and then inviting in some other partners, and many of them are staff, to really plan what a linkage meeting around this type of topic would look like.
If it was to be a committee, there's one committee which is continuing to try to identify what its real purpose and role is, and we're trying to find a place for this topic of community engagement to be, and the question is whether goals and objectives might be one area. I mean, we're talking about repositioning that committee.
Sure.
And that would be Julie, myself, and Dave Betcher. And if it's not appropriate at this time to say, hey, is this going to be happening, then we have a few individuals who might just be interested, and they're not on any particular committee together, and that could be willing to work with you on that.
Yes.
So I guess.
I'm fine with that.
I'm willing to help, however I
That would be
can
great.
help.
Is that something that,
Well, for me, it's a question of time,
yeah,
of day that you want to do it.
I think if we could just do it as a regular goals committee meeting, we could meet it around your schedule, and we would invite in some of the folks that I'd like to have around the table to really have that planning discussion.
Works for me.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Perfect.
And then the only other special meetings that we've historically had that aren't on this list either, and we had put it into one meeting, but it might end up becoming two in the future, are evaluations.
Yep.
Usually the board evaluation, we have been able to tack into another agenda item if it wasn't also with yours, but, you know, later we'll be talking about the possibility of doing yours evaluation in June.
Yep.
So that's another couple to add to the list.
So,
Any other,
that was really the specific one. When we get to the end of our night, we can schedule the goals committee to really kind of forward that. But I just wanted to present tonight what I saw the next 90 days looking like, plus some, and also looking at really what some of those timelines would look like for some of the items that we've wanted to accomplish this year.
okay,
Okay.
now we have the third Friday count.
Yep. Now, the next time I'm going to turn over to Steve and have him walk through third Friday count. I believe he's already sent out to you via email, but I wanted him just to take a few minutes to share that with you tonight, because that's a pretty important piece as we walk into our annual meeting and such in the next week.
Thank you, Randy.
Can you explain for some of the individuals who are present what this means?
Sure, absolutely. So 2 times a year, the state of Wisconsin requires us to count all of the students attending our school district and report that information back to them. So all of you in the room are a part of the student count information that we're sharing tonight with the school board. So we do the first student count on what's the third Friday of the month in September. So we go school by school and grade by grade and count all of the students who are enrolled in our school district as of that date and time. The students are tracked into a couple of different categories. Residents mean you live in the Waunakee Community School District and you attend our school. Open enrollment students mean you do not currently live in the Waunakee school system, but through the state's open enrollment program, you've chosen and the school board has accepted your application to attend the Waunakee schools. Open enrollment out, those are students who reside within the Waunakee Community School System who have opted to attend another public school district outside of our boundaries. So during that count process, we add the total number of students up on that date in September and report it back to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. That information has very significant ramifications for budget planning. And the reason for that is the state has developed this formula called the revenue cap. And the revenue cap is has a major determination on our budget. The third Friday in September student count is a factor in the state's revenue cap formula. To plan for our budget, we have to estimate how many students we think are going to be here in September. So we estimated 4,189 students way back in February when we were working with the budget committee on presenting this information, hoping that when we came to September, we would be close. Well, this year we were very close because the final count was 4,188 students in our district as of the third Friday in September. So that was very positive news in that our budget planning process was close to what we were actually estimating to what actually happened in September. There was some pretty interesting information in the count. As an example, the 8th grade class is the largest class in the school district with 327 students. So that's the highest number that we have right now. The 6th grade class is coming very close. The 6th grade class is up to 320 students enrolled in the school district at this time. We also have a very large elementary class, and that would be the 2nd grade. They're now at 312 students. And that's a very high number historically for our school system in an elementary level. We normally do not see numbers that high in the K-4 level. Some other interesting information is our kindergarten total was not that high. Historically, we've actually seen higher numbers in kindergarten than what we saw this year. So while we have a very large second grade, we don't necessarily have other very large enrollments in the K through 4 area at this time. The second grade is a little bit of an outlier, meaning it's a much higher number than we're used to seeing, but the other grades are very similar to what we've seen before. It's important to keep in mind, budget planning and enrollment planning in this manner is not really connected to facility planning, which is why earlier Randy talked about our interest in bringing back a presentation to you in December, which really connects this enrollment count to facility planning. So Randy and I have been in conversations with Mark Roffers, who developed our long-range facility plan that you've seen before, about preparing an update to the school board to connect this third Friday count with the projections that we were using for facility planning. In addition to that, Mark is reviewing an update to the Waunakee Westport Comprehensive Plan to share that information with you as well, so that you could see how this count connects to not only the new capacities we have in our school system based on the referendum work that was recently completed, but also how our community plans have perhaps changed or what may be changing in the future. So we're looking forward to bringing Mark back in December and including this information in his report that he brings back to the board, which will have more of a facility planning focus. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have from the student count information that was presented.
Mark?
Is there average that you can assign? So you've got 312, I think you said it, fourth grade?
Second grade.
Second grade. Is there sort of an anticipated average growth that you can kind of predict what the eighth grade is going to look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our budget planning model actually is pretty detailed, and it goes back 5 years to study the movement between the grade levels and does apply that average, as you're saying, as the growth moves forward. So in this situation, the model looks back and looks over the last 5 years to see how did a student population change between first grade and second grade, and goes back over those 5 years, averages it out. So let's say maybe the increase was 10 students, and then takes that increase and applies it to that class moving forward. And then does the same thing for every movement between all of the grades K through 12. So the calculation is pretty complicated going back over those 5 years, but that model has proven to be quite accurate for us. In any one class may have higher increases from one year to the next, but we have seen student growth in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 students, as a good range at this grade level, which is why we have to keep our eye on the number of teachers we have per section in each of those grades, because in a couple of year period of time, we could see a need to add a teacher for any particular class.
Something you may have recalled is in the past years, we've been very, very conservative with our student growth numbers and really undershooting what our growth has been. And then this time of the year, we're coming in and we have 20, 30 more kids than we projected. So last budget cycle, we came to the board and said we believe we need to be a little less conservative, otherwise plan for a little bit larger growth. And that was really what brought us really to that number where we were pretty much right on. So we did, Steve did a pretty good job trying to determine what kind of that middle of the road area was, but backing away from that ultra conservative aspect of it. And then, as Steve said, we'll be rolling this forward into some of our work with Mark Roffers, which starts to really look now at an annual tracking of how are we doing with our long-range facility plan, our space in buildings, and our growth.
Okay, any other questions for Steve on the third Friday count?
Peggy, if I could just add one more comment I didn't mention before. You know, every spring, the school board has to make a decision on open enrollment applications into
Yes.
the district as well as open enrollment applications out. And we typically see pretty large lists at that time. It's interesting to note the open enrollment in changed from 172 to 175, so a net change of only 3. And the open enrollment out changed from 39 to 42, so an open enrollment net change of 3. So while we do see, you know, a lot of requests one way or another, in the end, open enrollment is a pretty minor situation for us. We don't have a lot of students choosing it really in or out. And so we kind of go from these big lists, you know, early in the spring to really, you know, a net change of like 3 students from one year to the next. So I just thought that was worth noting.
Has there been, I'm guessing every year you look at what St. John's enrollment is in the lower grades, because we know eventually, no matter what, they're gonna roll out into the Waunakee public schools. Have you seen anything in there different than normal? I mean, are their numbers pretty steady?
That's a good question. We do collect the St. John's information every year for a couple of reasons. Number one, we do have to report the St. John's students to the state of Wisconsin in our annual census data. So we do collect that every year for that reason and just planning as we move forward. The enrollment at St. John's is very steady. Seems to me from the last report we received, it was almost comparable to what it was the year before. So I would say the enrollment at St. John's has been, you know, from the information that we've seen, very consistent.
Yeah, they've rolled up their 7th and 8th grade program, so we've been monitoring that the last few years. Seems like projecting off the top, about half of the students come and half stay for the students that are there, but we'll be seeing more of that as we get a better trend over the next few years as that develops.
And just for my own enlightenment, do you have to include as out numbers those students who choose to go to a parochial school outside of the city limits, say in Edgewood or perhaps, you know, could be any denomination school down the road somewhere?
Sure, so on the third Friday count, the state does not require us to report it, but we do report it on the census count, which is something we do every summer.
Okay.
So we do collect that information from Madison Country Day, so like private schools within our borders, as well as students who attend like West Side Christian School or Edgewood or other locations. So we do have that information as well that gets reported, not on this process, but on a census process we conduct every summer.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. The next
Well,
item.
thank you for joining us.
Thanks, boys.
Thank you. Good luck with your projects.
Lost half our audience.
I think that was the.
That was the audience.
Sorry, Steve, I couldn't hold him. This is gonna be highlight of the meeting.
All right. Our next report tonight is on internal controls. This is an item that Steve's been working on for a few years here. We had an update last year, but as we're putting together really our strategic planning frameworks on each of these items, this is one that is, Steve has some timelines and some pieces to really share with you as an update and a follow-up and give you an idea of what's to come. So I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Randy. So this slide really just touches on what I'd like to accomplish tonight in this presentation. The first part is just relate this to our strategic planning process, what our objectives are with the internal controls process, who has been involved in the discussions, what we have accomplished so far, the goals and timelines really identify what we still have to accomplish and when we would like to accomplish that by. And then looking a little bit further out, what do we hope to accomplish in 2017, 18, and beyond. And I have to admit, I borrowed this slide from Tim Schell, so you may see a slide similar to this in his presentation next. So the purpose of this slide is really to show where this topic is connected in our district strategic plan. So it's under the budget and finance section, and where the arrow is pointing to is the blue box labeled internal controls, and that's really the overall focus of this presentation tonight. So the purpose of internal controls is something that we've spent a lot of time talking about with the individuals that have been involved in this discussion, and really identifying why are we going through all of our current procedures and practices and board policies and looking for improvements. And really the purpose of internal controls is identified on the right-hand side with what it is that we're trying to accomplish by implementing improvements and changes to our internal controls. On the left-hand side, what you see is on the school district's business services website, we've identified a procedures and internal controls section which is available to be viewed publicly. So this is not an internal website. This is something available to the public under business services, where we identify what is the purpose of internal controls for our organization. And then each of the various sections are identified in their own categories. The ones that we have accomplished to date are identified with a different color that can be clicked on or they can be reviewed and read, and the ones that we have not accomplished yet are identified in black, indicating that we still have to work on them. Who has been involved in our internal control project? First of all, the primary development has been by LaDonna Radel, our accounting specialist. So LaDonna's in her second year of employment in the role of accounting specialist. The school board authorized that position in early 2015 after the November of 2014 referendum was approved, knowing that the volume of transactions that was going to be coming after the referendum passed, and feedback based on staffing surveys that we had completed with other business office showed a need to add those services to our district. As we have developed all of our internal controls, we have requested feedback and review by all of the budgetary administrative assistants working for all of the various departments and buildings in the district. Our district audit firm has reviewed and has provided feedback at this point multiple times on what we've been putting together for our internal controls. We've done quite a bit of research into what's considered best practices from other public schools. We often have to look at much larger public schools than ours to try to find schools that have things like internal auditing, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and some of these other practices in place. Generally speaking, smaller school systems just don't have the ability, staffing-wise, to do things like internal auditing, and we didn't either prior to the addition of the accounting specialist role. So we have had to look at some pretty large school systems to see what they've been doing in these areas. The Board of Education was involved. We had many policy changes that we moved forward in the last year. Most of them were towards the latter part of 2015. The Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has put out information on internal control, specifically in the federal and state grant area. And then we've involved a lot of individuals like in specialized roles, like Kurt Ely in his role as the manager of the federal special ed funds would be a great example of other individuals who have been involved in this process. So what have we accomplished so far? So funds management was one of the first and largest areas that we looked at. One of the first things that we did was we created a new district-wide form that was required to be used for all deposits that involve cash boxes. And these forms are now available to the business office staff. So whenever a deposit is made, we require that this documentation be uploaded into the district's financial system so we have access to it out here at Bethel Circle as well. One of the other changes that we made is that cash boxes need to be operated solely by district paid staff, and that we were no longer going to allow volunteers to handle cash. Now that's a change that's actually cost us some money, because we did have some situations before where volunteers were working in particular areas to collect cash. However, we felt it was more appropriate and it was a best practice for us to have district paid staff working at all events where actually cash was involved.
Steve, a question on that. Have you looked at how much we've saved, or you know, is there any shrinkage with volunteers doing it versus what we're doing now?
So in some situations, we can't compare because we did not have this type of documentation before. And a good example with the practice would have been some sports, the booster parents volunteer to sell the tickets, and then the funds weren't handled in this type of a manner. So we can't necessarily go back and compare, but it would be an accurate point to say in some situations we now have a consistent person there at all times, so we might be collecting admissions into events that weren't collected before because maybe a volunteer wasn't there or only had to work part of the shift. So even though there's been a cost out, it's also likely that given the event, there might be some additional dollars being collected that weren't previously. But comparing it from one year to the next with something like that would be difficult to do because the funds weren't necessarily deposited into our accounts in the first place when it was done the previous way.
There was no count per cash box previously.
In the journal entry area, we've created a process where all journal entries reviewed for approval are completed by the accounting specialist. Transactions were clarified for appropriate use, so they're no longer used to do things like adjust someone's budget. They're used to just change if an incorrect account number was used to pay a bill or to enter a deposit. So we now have one person in the district reviewing and approving all of those journal entries prior to them actually taking place in our financial system, and that's done by the accounting specialist role. Purchasing, we've implemented a secondary approval level for all purchases over $5,000. And what that means is that documentation is now required to be provided. We have a school board policy that says, for example, unless there's an exception, purchases of $5,000 or more need multiple quotes. So when a building or a department is requesting to approve something over $5,000, that documentation is uploaded into our district financial system, and we have one person who has to review and approve those purchases before they move forward. The Board of Ed receives a monthly report of purchase orders over $5,000. There's a snippet of that at the bottom. That's something that's included for your review on a monthly basis. We also created a brand new purchasing or requisition group so that all reimbursement requests by administrators and administrative assistants are reviewed by the accounting specialist to ensure an independent level of review and approval. Meaning any individual building or department is not able to approve any reimbursement that they're putting in for personal expenses. So that is now done by one individual to make sure that that's being done independently for review and approval. Federal grant management, there's been a significant amount of changes in this area to comply with new DPI requirements. One example in the lower left, you see that we've created an annual disclosure of a conflict of interest form that is required of all staff who play a role in the federal grant process. So you have to identify upfront if there's any conflicts that may exist with your role as managing federal grants. We're implementing budget revisions into our Skyward financial system for improved management and reporting, and we are following a monthly grant submission process for all federal grants.
I have a quick question.
Excuse me, yep.
And I know this is federal grants, but grants in general. I know that, you know, there are grants that individuals will apply for when they become aware of them. And some of the larger ones, well, a grant submission is one thing, but the monitoring, you know, in compliance to ensure that you're doing what the intending folks who provide the money, you know, that you're doing what you said you do. But some districts have grant managers, I mean, people who that's their role, because they also play a role in helping get funds, you know, somebody who's always out there looking to say, hey, you know, is, pardon? Like a grant, yeah, grant writers, you know, and because it takes a lot of time and energy, and sometimes there's money out there that people could really appreciate, but they don't either know how to apply for a grant, or the time and energy once you find it. And I don't know, has there ever been a discussion on that topic, and if maybe it's not an issue, because things are fine, but I know some districts have different positions on that.
Yeah, the larger you get as a school system, the more likely it is that you have a grant writer, grant manager, grant administrator. Districts of our size typically have a person with another responsibility, like Kurt Ely is Director of Special Ed. The management of the federal funds for special education goes to Kurt. Amy's in the back. Amy manages Title I, Tim manages Title II. So different folks take on different responsibilities just within their regular duties based on what they're doing. So districts of our size typically handle it that way, but yes, as you start getting larger, that does become more common.
Well, then the other thing, particularly with the reauthorization of ESEA or ESSA, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff in Title I and Title II now that are like, whoa, you know,
Yeah.
that there's the potential for getting more, and so I'm glad to know that we've got individuals who are already kind of targeted and working those areas.
At one point, didn't we have a parent that volunteered, was gonna volunteer and had some expertise in that area?
She did, and then she wanted to be the person who would write grants, and then she found another job, and that wasn't something that was gonna work any longer.
We have had conversations on the foundation board where,
Okay, yeah.
you know, if you could give somebody X and then give them a fee based on success, increased fee based on success. So that's been
Okay, so there's some done, yeah, okay.
around that table.
CISA has also done some things where they've hired grant writers that then they contract out to districts. So I know CISA 6 does that, and that was,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
so there's been a few of those type of models out there.
Okay.
Credit cards. This was our first program where we introduced the concept of internal auditing. The Census was our first program of instituting that. We did work with our audit firm quite closely, as well as conducted research to really understand what is the best practice and how to implement something like this. So based on feedback from our audit firm, we complete an audit of 5% of the overall monthly transactions. So all of the transactions that occur, 5% of them are pulled for an audit. And then 5% of all of the cards as well are pulled and selected for a complete review of all of the transactions. If a card shows a high rate of error, then that card is monitored every month until the errors have been corrected. The errors can be very minor in scope, meaning account number, not attaching documentation, a sales tax issue, But if there are errors, then the accounting specialist continues to monitor that card until whatever that particular error was has been corrected. Administrators have to sign off and review transactions on a monthly basis, which is the form that you see to the lower left. And now we have documentation that's available through our financial system of all staff that are approved to use credit cards. Our manual is online through our district financial system. You go through the process, which is on the lower right-hand side, to basically complete the review of the manual, sign off on the manual, acknowledge it, and then complete the form. So we have tracking in our office as far as everybody who's gone through that process and is eligible to use the credit cards.
How far down on the credit card, is it department heads, is it teachers? You know, how far down do you go on credit cards?
So typically in each building, we have a principal card and then a checkout card. And the checkout card is available for staff if they're going on a field trip or an event that needs to have it. We typically do not have cards beyond those two for each building department. There are some individuals, Michelle McGlynn is an example, the career coordinator who manages the Perkins grant. She has a card in that role. Our district social workers do for some of the work that they perform. But typically it's the two cards, you know, for each administrator, each department, and then others as necessary.
So you're talking around 50 cards?
I'd say around there, yep. What else we have accomplished? This is a really unique change that we've made. Thanks to Jack helping connect us to the owners of this company. Classmunity is a company owned by two professors from UW-Whitewater. This is a product that they launched earlier this year. At the time that we signed up, there were about 5 school districts that were using this product. Basically, this is a controlled and managed local version of like a GoFundMe page where individuals can make donations through this site and learn about what the initiative is. What you're seeing on the screen here is the Classmunity page for the Innovation Center. So we worked with Jeff Willauer to get this up and running. Jeff wrote a description of what the campaign is for, has right now just the conceptual plan. The site has the ability, and Jeff is going to be working on an actual video that can be shown for anybody who looks to go to this link. And one of the really neat things about this site is the way that we can partner with an organization like the Waunakee Area Education Foundation. We've worked with them so that the funds that are collected through this site are automatically deposited to the Waunakee Area Education Foundation. So things just like this can be set up for scholarship drives or other initiatives that we have in the district to be able to fundraise in this manner. We are partway through completing the Classmunity page for Warrior Stadium. And once we have these two fundraising programs up and running, we want to share this with our broader administrative team so that they can see how initiatives that might be going on at a building level can certainly be used as well through this product. Once we've paid the fee to participate, we are not limited to as many, we can have as many fundraising efforts going on as we would like. Why this is more controlled is that ultimately approvals have to be granted to go out and seek fundraising. Right now, individuals can go out on their own to like a GoFundMe or other page like that, and we don't even know they're doing it, because you can just go out as an individual and set something up. Through this, then we would know that they're doing it. So there's procedures involved. It's a really interesting product, and it's one that I think is going to be used pretty widespread throughout public schools in the near future. But we were able to get in kind of on the front end of this, and thanks again, Jack, for the connection to the folks who own this. It's definitely something we're pretty excited about and are looking forward to continue to expand. Another area that we're really excited about is really additional ways to collect funds electronically. For many years, we've already collected student fees, co-curricular fees, food service fees electronically, but we needed a mechanism to be able to collect other payments that, for example, students were making to participate in various activities. The Budget Committee approved the implementation of the RevTrack product probably February or March last year. And since we've had this product up and running, we've sold tickets for the Special Olympics dance through this product. We've sold tickets through the Performing Arts Center. All of our reserve seats are now loaded in the system. So Rick Braun used this last May to sell tickets. We used it for prom, so you can see up in the upper left, we collected $4,115 worth of prom tickets through this site and only $1,300 last year in cash and checks. So just in the first year of using it, the majority of the funds for prom tickets were sold this way. And we just sold homecoming tickets for the first time through this site as well. And that was extremely successful. The overwhelming majority of homecoming tickets were sold through this mechanism. Retirees now have an ability to make a payment to us to stay on our dental plan from wherever they happen to reside. And they've asked for an ability to make payments to us this way. We're also now, get the next slide to come up, Christy Knacker is now using this product for all of her aquatic center class registrations. So you can see all of those different icons are different programs that Christy has set up under the RevTrack program for people to be able to pay through this system for the programs that she's running in the aquatic center. So there are a whole, I would say, significant amount of opportunities that we have in our organization to use this web store to continue to expand those icons for other areas where funds are collected that are not necessarily connected through our Infinite Campus system. One of the other areas that we developed in the last year was a business services for staff. This is an internal website where staff can go to see what our most up-to-date instructions and procedures and policies are for all of these areas. It stays current so that anything that is changing continues to be updated for anyone who's looking to take a look at it. A little example that was called out on the right-hand side is administrators' college credit tuition reimbursement has been converted from a paper form process to an online Google form that is routed through the approval process that way. And basically this is an effort for us to turn forms that may have traditionally been done by a paper-based into an electronic type format. So where do we want to go in the future? We have a goal to complete all of the internal controls by June of 2017. Initially, we had a goal of trying to complete them all by December of 2016. We've had some staffing changes in the business office. And as a result of our staffing changes and a family medical leave that we had, we just had to extend the date out to be able to make sure we could meet everything that we were trying to accomplish. I know it's a little hard to see, but on the left-hand side, this is our business office goal. You'd see the various internal controls remaining there with a month identified as when we would like to have it accomplished by. So our goal is to have all of them reviewed and revised by June of 2017. As we look a little further beyond that, in 2017-18, we'd like to monitor all of the internal controls, make any additional internal control opportunities, take a look at those. We want to continue the use of technology in Skyward, which is our financial system, to improve our internal controls. And probably a pretty big point, which is the last one, is other departments and how they relate to finance. And a good example of that would be human resources. We do need to get to the point where we have internal controls beyond the scope of the business office. And we know that that has to be on the radar for where we're going to go into the future. But we really wanted to start with our core department and have them all completed first. And then as we get beyond, you know, to 2016, 17, we're gonna need to look at how they might relate to other departments as well. And at this time, I'll be happy to talk about any questions or feedback that you have for us.
Wow. Well, impressive.
I have a couple. One, I'm curious, do any of those new methods help us with interfaces with like booster groups and how those purchase orders, you know, kind of get processed through us to be tax exempt, but then it's the booster groups that are collecting the money and turning. Has that been helpful or integrated at all into any of these processes?
So great question. So we work with booster groups, in many different kinds of ways. There are some that have the systems in place on their own. A good example of that would be the Touchdown Club, where they take care of all of their accounting themselves, all of the deposits go into their own accounts, and we do very little work for them just because of the way they handle it. There's others where we do a tremendous amount of the work for them. A good example of that would be Music Boosters. We have all of the money now for the Music Booster Club. And that group, as a great example, has been looking for an electronic option to do things like the fruit sale. And that group was one of the initial groups that really led us to trying to find RevTrack. We just didn't find it in time to do the fruit sales last year. But I know that particular group is one that, as an example, is a booster club that we work closely with that will want to use this. And they also have talked about collecting their fees through a program like this. So I think it depends on the booster group. I think some of them will definitely be interested in this, others may not be. But the really nice feature about Classmunity is we do have the ability to work with outside groups. So a good example could be if the Touchdown Club wanted to collect something through the Classmunity site, we can actually direct the dollars into their account specifically if we so chose to. At this point, we've just limited to the Waunakee Area Education Foundation, but these programs are flexible enough that we can use them in many different ways.
And then my second question was, I'm just curious, the role of our outside auditors in assisting with either prompting some of these suggestions for process or in establishing best practices and how that all works back and forth.
Sure, absolutely. So the internal auditing program for credit cards, I think, is a great example. So we drafted up our first version of what we thought internal auditing for credit cards looked like, and then we shared it with them. And we said, you know, we would like your expertise in what you would suggest. They came back and added, I'll go back to that slide on the credit card audit. Okay, so the third bullet point down there, that was completely our audit firm's input. They said, we would like to see you continuously monitor cards that have a high rate of processing error. So that was not included in our initial draft. Our initial draft focused on the first two bullet points. And they said, no, we'd like to see you add this piece, because if you add this piece, it sends the message that you can't just have that for 1 month, because we're going to keep looking at it the next month, the next month, the next month. The other piece that they added to it was the dual layer, the two different levels of the 5%. We had suggested 5% of all transactions. they suggested not only the 5%, but also take 5% of the actual cards. So we did an initial draft, shared it with them. We also shared it internally. They provided their feedback. That's the same type of situation that we've had with many of the internal controls, where we've created a draft based on what we've researched as best practice, and then received input from all of the various organizations. The federal grants management was one where it wasn't necessarily our internal auditors, it was more the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction saying, these are the things that that we would like to see. We went to the federal funds management conference last winter, where we learned about the various pieces that they wanted to do. So some of them have definitely been by our audit firm, some of them have been not. Another example that our audit firm was inquiring with our internal controls this summer was departments beyond the business office. So they were asking questions about payroll, they were asking questions about benefits, and what kind of controls are in place for departments besides ours. And for some of them, we don't have them developed yet. So they came back and said, okay, that's going to be a recommendation that the internal control program has to go beyond the business office. It's going to have to expand to other departments within the organization. So they've been actively involved in the process. They've been involved in both drafting what we're doing, and then in our audit process this past summer, evaluating how it was actually implemented. So on kind of both ends of the spectrum.
This just represents a tremendous amount of work, and I guess I just want to congratulate you and LaDonna for all the work that's been initiated over the last 2 years. I feel like we've covered a ton of ground, and there's no doubt in my mind, made vast improvements in a really pretty short amount of time. And I know, like in LaDonna's role in particular, that's awful tricky to raise your hand and say, I just found a big boo-boo, we gotta fix it. But that is the nature of this work. So again, I want to thank her in particular, and you and your group for working to make all of those processes more efficient, more transparent, and more buttoned up. It's a good thing.
Thank you. I'll share your
Couldn't say it
comments
better.
because this has been a big part of her work, over the time, so I'll definitely let her know that, so thank you.
Definitely.
It's awesome.
From all of us. Oh, thanks.
Good, thanks, Steve.
And while Tim is coming up here, one of the things that I shared with Randy is I really appreciate the front slide. So like you said, where you're basically pointing the arrow to the box in the strategic planning format for each of the areas you're reporting on. I think that's appropriate. So thank you, Tim and Steve, for using it.
So we're going to transition from internal controls to the STEAM report. I think one difference that you'll see in these reports tonight is, I think, to really get an understanding of what some of the work we're doing in STEAM, this is kind of the STEAM 101 version for our district, to give you an introduction of what are some of the things that are occurring. As you see some of the subcategories or other work that we're doing under here, those are some of the pieces that will then get built out with more robust plans, timelines, etc. But tonight is really kind of a survey of what we're doing with STEAM, and I'll turn it over to Tim to kind of give that introduction.
Thank you, Randy. You should have seen a version of this in PDF format in your packet, in board book. There may have been a few little pieces that, in the PDF translation. So there may be a few things new here, but I think you've seen the gist of this already. This is the section under teaching and learning. This is the STEAM Critical Action Plan. And just to put it in context, we have several items there on the far left under teaching and learning. And STEAM is that box on our strategic planning framework. So what we're going to do this evening is just provide you with a high-level overview and certainly answer any general questions you have, understanding we're going to come back with more detail on these ongoing pieces of work down the road. So we're going to cover the purpose statement, make sure we're oriented to some of the terms and projects that are under this action plan, a little bit of treatment on our metrics and projects that are under this action plan. The key thing to remember here, as Randy just mentioned, is that there are several projects under this plan, some of which you've seen to a degree before, some of which you may have not, or maybe not in a while. We'll be bringing in reporting and monitoring on those, perhaps some to curriculum committee, perhaps some to the full board in more detail over the year, and we'll have an opportunity then to get kind of deeper into the details on each if you choose. Number 6 tonight, kind of our goal, though, is to stay out of the weeds, okay, and just kind of keep focused on the long term here. So what is STEAM? This is a chart I saw the other day, and I just wanted to include it because I thought it kind of encapsulated in a visual form some of the significance of this area. So STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. It is certainly some of the things that lead to some of our greatest accomplishments and advances as a culture and a civilization. There's a lot of unique strands in here that stand on their own, but there are a lot of opportunities for interdisciplinary work and mutual support as well, particularly in elementary schools and high schools in the learning process for kids. So our purpose statement for this, you see here, I'm not going to read it to you, but I do want to kind of point out that a key thing is that STEAM traditionally, STEAM is not, the STEAM acronym may be the acronym of the day, but these are not new subjects to be present in our programs, and really not new subjects for most school districts. But some of these might in the past have been seen as nice to haves or important learning perhaps for a subsection of the population. Today, I think as we look at the world around us, we look at how information and technology are just more present in everything today. This is more of a foundational element, and I think is perhaps more generally realized as a foundational element than maybe 30 years ago. So we have 7 key projects, I should say, under here. One is updating our math program resources, next generation science standards, the Innovation Center, our digital learning plan, our local art and music standards, Project Lead the Way Biomedical Sciences, and last but not least, PLC in a Mathematics at Work. So just 3 big terms I want to get out of the way right from the start. Some of these will be familiar, but just out of an abundance of caution, I want to go over all 3 of these. First of all, you may see a reference to NGSS. Those are the Next Generation Science Standards. Those are standards that are not currently the Wisconsin standards. Wisconsin is still stuck on model academic standards from 20 years ago for science as a state. You as a board moved to adopt the Next Generation Science Standards in May of 2014. Next Generation Science Standards are organized in 3 dimensions. Disciplinary core ideas, those are what you might traditionally think of as the science content. Cross-cutting concepts, things like stability and change or patterns. And then science and engineering practices, which would be making an argument, interpreting data, formulating questions and conducting investigations, things like that that go into the work of science and the work of engineering. Project Lead the Way is a set of STEM, and we take the A out of STEAM here, STEM curricula for schools. They're very focused on engineering, science, technology, and math. This is something that for about a decade we've used at the high school. If you think about Principles of Engineering, the Engineering Seminar, Gateway to Technology at the middle school, those would be those courses we've had for about a decade. We piloted the elementary launch program, which is NGSS aligned, beginning in 14-15 school year. And there's a biomedical science aspect to Project Lead the Way that we're going to be bringing more information to you later on. Last term is maker spaces. It's kind of an inclusive idea to workshops with kind of a do-it-yourself bent. A fab lab is a type of makerspace, but there are others. It's a term you'll use a lot. Now, at the high school, we're very focused on the Innovation Center, which is going down kind of the fab lab flavor, I should say. But if you look at the intermediate school and you were to go into the library and what Sarah Wendorf is doing, should be doing more of a library media center makerspace type of thing there if you've seen that. Some key metrics, and this is just not to get into depth on the metrics, it's some things in these areas that we are or will be looking at. Student growth on some of our assessments, our percent of students passing algebra or higher in the 8th grade, how we're doing at actually implementing the NGSS in our lessons and report cards. Metrics we're in the process of working with Jeff Willauer and others on developing for the Innovation Center. And for those of you that are familiar with the technology plan, you know that we have goals and objective measures in there too. So as you see these projects come forward to you for monitoring and reporting over the next few months, this is the type of thing you might see associated with some of those projects. First project to talk about tonight, math program resources update. Not going to go into this in detail, but just this past spring, we adopted the Go Math after a pilot. Our teachers are in the process of implementing that and going through their professional development on that this year. The high school team is in the process of looking at new resources that might come to you for adoption in a year or so. For NGSS, it's our second year for Project Lead the Way launch, but Ryan King and our science educators are working very hard on working from that kind of cornerstone of the launch program and supplementing that with lessons and beginning to update our report cards. We probably won't be updating the report card standards till next year, but that's something that the teachers are actually working on this year for next year. Innovation Center, you've seen a lot on this over the last almost year now. We just formally opened it a few weeks ago. Some of the key things happening this year is launching the Business Advisory Council and continuing and deepening those partnerships. Later this fall, you will see the new course proposal for Fab Lab 1, or how to make almost anything. Professional development is a big aspect to this. So we have sent staff out to training. We're going to continue to send staff out for training. And we also look forward to putting in a proposal for the second round of WEDC funding. We were successful earlier this year on the first round of WEDC funding. Digital Learning Plan is what we now call our technology plan. We've been on 3-year cycles of digital learning plans since the 1990s. This is, again, our planning year. It's something that Herb and the library media staff in particular take a big leadership role in. Amy and I work on supporting them in that. Two things that are going to be focal points, I think, on this year's iteration will be an assessment of where we are and what our future plans are for one-to-one, as we look at kind of where the landscape is and where our peer districts are and what our instructional needs are. And secondly, kind of the National Technology in Schools Association, ISTE, has come up with updated standards, and those are certainly something Herb and our library media specialists are looking at. Over the last 2 years, you've seen Kathy Bartling and our music educators, and then Melanie Trainer-Burton and our art educators come into you with standards that you have adopted, which are Waunakee standards that have integrated components that we thought were the strongest of some national model standards and the Wisconsin state standards. Those two departments are continuing to work on updating their courses and the materials that go along with those, and that's kind of what they're engaged in this year. It's a course, but it's significant because it's our first Project Lead the Way component at the high school that extends beyond engineering, and that is biomedical sciences, and that is going to be a new course proposal you will be seeing later this fall as well. and hopefully it meets with your approval, and we can open it up for student registration for 17-18. But again, you'll have a chance to get a lot more on that when we bring it through as a new course here in a little bit. Last but not least is a project area. We work on a PLC framework. Math is one of our areas under the STEAM. And so there is a framework for thinking about collaborative work in mathematics teaching and learning called Mathematics in the PLC at Work. We've been offering a once-a-month seminar, primarily for teachers below the high school level, that looks at this framework for organizing team actions to support math. If I were to bring in kind of a summary on these high leverage team actions, I bet there are a lot of things on that list, Joan, that you would recognize from what you did in some of your high school course teams when you were at the high school. Things like pre-unit planning, collaboration during the unit, and kind of at the end of the unit, what worked, what didn't, what will we do differently next year on the same unit. So this is something we're continuing to try to get more in, to try to bridge the PLC framework and the actual content instruction in mathematics. So to kind of bring it up to the close before questions, this is a important area. We have a lot of things going on in here. Some have been developing for a while, some are new pieces this year. I've tried to give you the quick summary on what's in the box. Now over the next several months, we'll be bringing out elements in that box, or if you want to think of it as a holiday basket. The cheese will come out one month, the crackers, the sausage stick, and we'll cover each of these in their own time. But the key thing to understand is that there's going to be a lot more coming to you, and we're going to bring it both into big meetings like this and meetings of the curriculum committee for reporting and monitoring. The other thing is several of the departments that are in this, science, for example, tech ed, they are probably going to be on the docket to come into those two special meetings that you have, hopefully in the January and April timeframes. We're going to have those departmental reports, and that'll give you kind of that direct teacher perspective on these as well. So I know that was a lot in a very short period of time. And again, we're trying to avoid the weeds tonight, but I'm sure there are some questions you may have after just kind of seeing the summary introduction.
I have one question.
Yes.
I remembered when we first brought Project Lead the Way into our curriculum. And it's great to see the addition of this other module, which has been around for a little while, but is, without getting into the weeds, is there going to be the same kind of potential investment as there was in this one as there was for the original Project Lead the Way?
That's a good question. There is going to be some, not as significant, just because the requirements for the pre-engineering piece, were more significant, partly because you had specialized software and specialized robotics kits.
Yep.
With biomedical science, there are some things that we need because we do have biotech and some other life sciences pieces already in place at the high school. Some of it we have, some are new. So when you see this, off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact dollar value
That's
that
all right.
Stephanie
I mean,
Kirker.
I just remember there was like a
there is some,
major,
yes, there is some
phase-in.
investment. We'll be treating it kind of as a textbook expense, but yes, you'll see that
Okay.
reflected.
Okay, interesting. It's good to see that that's coming. It'll be interesting to see how they deliver it in that same kind of model they developed with PLPWs.
Yeah.
Mark? Oh, okay. Julie?
Well, I just noticed, and I know you're not trying to get into the weeds, but of this STEAM presentation, it seemed very STEM heavy. So I hope at some point we are working harder to integrate the arts component and all of those ties. Curriculum-wise, I mean, I can see we've had discussions before about required courses. We're calling this STEAM now, not STEM, and yet we don't have a fine arts component to our requirements, graduation requirements. So It's just longer term thoughts for down the road. I would like to see more of the art components integrated into the STEM.
Some of the interesting pieces in this, we'll get into in one of our future meetings, but as the Innovation Center pieces started moving, I think the first users of it are the art kids. And that's what I'm seeing right now, is that I see Kayla and her class kind of tying in there and starting to bring, that's kind of the first group to go in as opposed to some of the tech ed kids, which I think is pretty cool. So hopefully that'll continue to grow and we'll see more of those, some of those connections too.
That's an easy one, but at the elementary level, even something like general music, when you're
Yeah.
teaching whole notes, quarter notes,
Yeah.
you know, combine that with your fraction lessons, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
More conscious in how we do it.
Get them playing piano at 7 o'clock in the night.
There you go.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
More to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Tim. So that was our reports to the strategic plan. Next month, we do have some additional ones. There will, when I look just as a kind of a precursor to what year we'll have a follow-up on where we're going with some of our linkage meetings. The healthcare clinic will be coming back with some recommendations per feedback you provided. Multi-level systems of support, Janet Thomas will be talking about that approach, particularly giving some updates on things like PBIS. And then long-range facility planning that we had a precursor to tonight will be coming in December. So we'll be putting some of those pieces together. You'll continue to see some of these items. There will be, as I said, some of these items coming back for action. And as Tim kind of did a good job just kind of summarizing, you at least know what's on the table here as things move forward over the next few months and where we may have some actionable items in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, item D, administrative reports. This is basically the resolution for the borrowing. If you can just briefly describe it, I mean, it's a roll call vote. This is something we do every year at this time.
Yes, thank you, Peggy. So every year we have some pretty significant swings in the timing of our revenues. Most of our revenues come either from property taxes or state aid, and they come at very distinct times of the year, but our expenses are very consistent. So to bridge the gap, most public schools in Wisconsin have to do something called cash flow borrowing on a temporary basis. This agenda item is requesting to borrow not to exceed $4 million. $4 million is what we borrowed last year. A couple years ago, we were at $5 million, so it's a little bit lower than we were historically. This program that we're in through PMA, which is our financial advisor, involves other public school districts in the same borrowing situation that we are in. And our borrowing situation, if you can recall, we refinanced debt in January. When we refinanced debt in January, that used our IRS bank qualified money for the year, which put us into a taxable borrowing at this point. It's a good thing because we saved quite a bit of money last January, but now when we do the tax borrowing, it's taxable. The good news is there's a group of school districts in the same situation as us. We pool our resources together, go in as a group, go out to the market together, and in the end, we all do better with our costs and our interest rate because we're working together to try to accomplish a common goal. And in our case tonight, we're requesting approval of the resolution not to exceed $4 million for our cash flow borrowing this year.
So the question is, when we make the motion, do we just have to say that first phrase or read all of it?
Just the first phrase is fine. Yep.
Is there a motion? And then we'll have discussion.
Motion to authorize temporary borrowing in an amount not to exceed $4 million.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Yes.
Steve, I mean, we've done this multiple times, and I know we've used contingency funds for other things, and we sometimes set up funds to pay off future debt. What would be, and I guess here, our problem is, I don't know what the interest rate is. I don't know how much this is really gonna cost us. Would it be worthwhile over time to start setting up so that this $4 million can be on hand at the beginning of the school year rather than constantly paying the interest on the $4 million? Or is it such an insignificant cost it's not worth doing?
It's a great question. I would say at this point in time, it's a pretty insignificant cost. And we pay back portions of the loan as soon as we possibly can. So we pay back 2 million of it early on in 2017, and then the rest of it in the summer. So our carrying costs on this type of a loan are very low. So typically, we just try to approach it in this manner.
I guess, I don't know what very low means.
I would
mean,
say.
What was last year?
Last year, I think the net cost was like 40,000. This year it's gonna be higher because it's taxable, because we refinanced that debt. We're in a different borrowing cycle this year. So we could be in the $100,000 range this year, just because of the fact that it's taxable at this point. But that's kind of coming with the $1 million savings we saw last year when we refinanced our debt.
So we're looking at about,
This year is higher than what we would typically see.
so we're talking about a 2.5% cost, and normally we have about a 1%
Yes.
cost.
Yep.
So, I mean, the lost cost of having money sitting in an escrow that we probably wouldn't get any real interest on anyway.
Yep. Yeah, and what, Dave's point is the more dollars you would have available up front, the less you have to borrow. It's that balancing act with the fund balance. There are some school districts that have just continued to pile dollars into their fund balance way above the state average, to the point where they don't do this at all, but that's pretty rare. I think we strike a pretty nice balance with our board policy at 15%. We're a little bit higher than that right now. It's a pretty good balance to make sure we've got to have a good reserve fund, but it doesn't get to the point, where it's to the point where we wouldn't need to borrow. That would really constrain what the board would be trying to accomplish over the next several years, but there are some school districts that do that.
What's our reserve fund roughly? What's
Around
the-
8 million right now, and we'd have to be up to the 12 million type range to not have to borrow at all. Should probably put our fund balance at around like 25% to get up to that level.
Any other questions? Okay, there's a motion and second on the table. This is a roll call vote. Betcher,
All right,
Ensign,
Aye.
Heineman,
Aye.
Hetzel,
Aye.
Weiner,
Aye.
and I for Hilbert. Motion's carried. Announcements.
Yeah, just some exciting announcements with some students who are being recognized by the National Merit Scholarship Program as commended students 2017. Benjamin Calkins, Vivian Wilhelms, Nicholas Mott, Grace Van Deelen, and Jade Roth. I'm just commending them for their recognition and their achievements under the National Merit Scholarship Program and being recognized. That's all I have for announcements.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, on to committee reports. We have the minutes of the curriculum committee were in our packet. It looks like there were no items being brought forward for action, but not informational. Any comments from the curriculum committee, chair or members?
I thought I'd just share, you've seen the minutes, the 3 initiatives, the PE waiver, the test and assessment committee, and online learning are all things that we're going to be looking at over the course of this year, and at some point will be brought to the board for updates and or board action as needed.
What I did notice in the packet was just a lot of information on student testing in America Great City Schools. Is that related to the testing assessment review committee? I mean, it's not need to, but it's mainly for that.
It was just background information, for the committee and really anybody on the board that kind of wanted to, get into some of the background there.
Okay, and then the only other question I had is on the PE, waiver thing. It's just the process will start, is what you're saying. Got it. Okay. Any individuals have specific questions? Other questions for Tim? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move to facilities committee. Couple of action items here.
I can take the facilities committee. There's 2 items on the agenda today for action. I think one of them you've seen in the past, board packet that we didn't take any action on. That was the weather station. This is a company in the Madison area that will put a weather station on really a municipal or a school building. It doesn't need to have any sort of attachment to electrical, et cetera. It's a standalone piece of equipment that will then allow us to access the data. The company uses the data for information for insurance companies and insurance claims. So Joe Bellamo and I have taken a look at this and are recommending that we find the spot on the intermediate school, and upon approval tonight of the board, we'll work with the group who will be owning that to really establish where the best location is. For use of our space on our roof, there's a $30 to $50 per month stipend that they will pay the district. So from our perspective, it puts a state-of-the-art weather station on our roof. We don't have any liability for it. It doesn't really connect into anything. It's really a standalone system, and we get the data from it over the internet. So pretty cool system.
I think the other thing too is they'd open up so that if kids want to make apps or program, help them with the program using that data.
Sure.
So it seems like a pretty safe bet for the district.
Yeah, I think so.
So is there a motion to approve of that, and then we'll have further discussion?
Move approval of the weather station placement on the intermediate school as recommended by committee. Second.
Moved and seconded. I just had one question. In terms of, in order to be able to access the information or read check on it, I mean, are these the individuals who would be gaining access to the building? I'm assuming that whenever we have outside folks, they kind of go through a
They
regular.
have to go through, yeah. They don't need regular access to it.
Okay.
They can all access it via online. But
Okay.
if they do need to maintain it, obviously they come through us, check into our building, et cetera. But it
Okay.
wouldn't be, they don't need regular or continued access to it.
Okay, onto the roof and things
Right,
like
no.
that, so, okay.
They would go through, at the intermediate school, they'd go through Rich and work through there.
Okay.
But Joe's looked into it, doesn't have any concerns, and we'll work with them upon approval.
Okay, great. Any other questions on this weather station? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
The next item is with an improvement to the wrestling room. I thought Aaron was going to be available tonight. I know he was out of town most of the day at meetings, and then there's parent-teacher conferences this evening, so I'm assuming he's helping out there. What this is really providing a subfloor, if you can picture kind of a more cushioned floor that our wrestling mats would then sit on top of, and it would be in the wrestling room at the high school. Part of the rationale for this is just that you have kids who are going to be wrestling on the mats for 2 hours a day. It just provides more cushioning for them and helps prevent injuries. Aaron has seen and been part of these systems in the past and is very supportive of them. He had brought into the committee really a cutout of that to show an illustration of it, and it's something that will be constructed and paid for by the wrestling club with no expense to the district. So the committee is recommending approval to the board.
Is there a motion for approval?
I move we approve the subfloor.
Okay.
Second.
Mark, seconded by Jack. Any questions? Can I assume that this is also gonna buffer the sound of the noise to the floors below when they drop the barbells? It is, I mean, it sounds like it's a big, cushion of some sort, right?
Yeah, this wouldn't be up in the weight room, this would be in the
Oh.
wrestling room.
Oh, it's all rest,
So
okay.
this is just simply the
Okay.
wrestling room is located,
I know where that is,
Yep.
okay.
exactly. Yep.
We could have them look into that.
I would love them to look into it. I mean, anybody who's got anything, that's right, it's like when I saw mats and buffers, I say, oh gosh, what, yeah,
Yeah.
that would be something worth looking into.
Okay.
Okay, so a motion's on the table, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carried.
Great, thank you.
Okay, HR committee, you will see the minutes from our meeting of last Friday in front of you as opposed to a board book because the meeting was just on Friday. There was one item that we are bringing forward for action of the board, and that's creation of a community ed aquatic supervisor position.
And I don't have that on the agenda tonight, Peggy, since this was posted.
Okay, got it.
So I'll bring that item back probably at one of our special meetings in the next few weeks.
Oh, my notice was not on there. Okay,
Yep.
sorry about that.
That's all right.
The one item I would just like to discuss with the board is bringing your attention to the fact that we're continuing to make progress on the superintendent evaluation process based on feedback from everyone. And in the board book packet for the HR meeting, you will find a copy of a document which is the Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, which is something that kind of outlines the responsibilities for professional leaders. The HR committee has discussed this as well as other documents, and we are going to continue moving forward. And the committee, if I can just read this just because it's easier to do, the committee discussed the timing of future evaluation cycles for superintendent with a preference for this taking place in June rather than January or February. And I think this is based on feedback from everybody as well as preference in terms of how it lines up with our other goals and objectives. There's also been discussion on replacing the current tool that we've got, recognizing that there's a need for a comprehensive tool, but actually how it gets used would vary each year depending on which area you want to be focusing on. Okay, so I think that's where we want to be going, but there's recognition that there needs to be a replacement to the current tool developed based on using things like rubrics and areas of focus and domains that are more relevant to today's administrative roles and responsibilities, as well as relationships with the boards. So there are some models out there which are being looked at and have been developed by other states, and the committee, and Joan and I have are willing to work together to create the draft of kind of a comprehensive something for people that we'll bring forward at a later date. But there's a lot of stuff that's already been done, and I won't say it's necessarily cutting and pasting, but we think it's going to be reflective of what everybody's been talking about. And it has areas for professional practice and also a section for, say, district goals or whatever, that are more related to the strategic planning piece. And there are models out there that are doing that. You can weight it, and so I'm hopeful. And what we've done is put a kind of a self-imposed target of having something ready to use by June of next year. And I think it's doable, given some of the pieces, but we just need to kind of hunker down and look at all the pieces and figure out how we're going to get from here to there. So, but obviously there would be review by all board members as well as at the committee level. I'm thinking probably the full board is a better review of this since it's a full board process as well. But any questions at this time from other board members on just that? Now, the one thing that I did want to bring up, simply because the committee had voted to use the current tool that we've got for this year's evaluation. If we in fact, but we never took action on that at the full board level. Okay, so we said, okay, well, we're going to use the current tool and we're going to add does not apply and all this kind of stuff. But that would mean that we would be using the current tool in December, handing it out and going through all the same stuff that we all really don't like, okay? So I guess my question, we don't have to make a decision because it's not an action item or anything. My preference, this is my preference, is that if in fact we can have a new tool ready by June, and that we're going to be doing it on an annual basis in that time frame, do we really even want to be considering going through the process using the existing tool we've currently got, and then just kind of wait for that extra 6 months? That's my question. Mark?
I guess two things. One, how that fits into the annual deadline in terms of by when we have to evaluate Randy. One concern. Two, whether you're using the current tool short term and then eventually transition to a different tool long term or some ramification, are we going to make sure that we actually have a little bit of a review of the tool so that we're all operating from the same perspective as opposed to coming in with sort of a randomized approach to how we're going to use it? Because that's kind of,
Okay, yeah, I understand.
when I look at the national standards, one of the recommendations is that whatever tool is used, that the board actually is trained to use the tool,
Mhm.
so that it's, they're approaching it from a similar perspective versus personal bias.
Okay. Well, point well taken. I just wanted to raise that as a, I mean,
Yeah,
it's worth.
I'm not sure that we want to get rid of the tool for this year.
Mhm.
You know, what we've talked about is implementing it for next year.
Mhm.
So using the same tool this year, because then everybody's got an opportunity to review it and kind of flush it out
Okay.
and put it into action. So,
Yep.
And part of, I think, the new evaluation system will be based on goals. And if you haven't set the goals and it's June, that's like a big part of it. So I do think it might need to be the current one and then figure this all out, and this is something, you know, we begin using in June by setting goals.
And that's great. The only thing I'll ask is that everybody participate in the process this
Amen
year.
to that.
well, I think everybody participated in the process, and if you don't participate, I guess what do we do, fire you?
Well, okay, that's fine, I just,
You know,
okay.
I agree we should all participate.
Yep.
But I think this new process, though, to Joan's point, is we're looking
Understand.
at
Yep.
goals
Yep.
that we want measurable, accountable, kind of the SMART goals that they were talking about at the WCSD.
At that meeting.
Yep.
And
Okay.
ways to monitor it, so it's very different.
Good, okay. Fine with that. Are there any other questions on anything you saw in the HR meeting?
I would like to ask, excuse me, one question about the points discussion.
Yes.
And that was there was a statement in there that the current write-up would not allow the payout version of the salary payout. But I know when we had that discussion before that there were some issues with WRS about that. But there was a feeling that we could create a version that would meet the WRS requirement. Are we still looking into that, or have we figured out that we can't do it?
One of the things, Dave, is that Steve had a conversation with one of our attorneys that, under the current, I guess, proposal of how we were looking at it, it did not fit that model. There were other ways to do it, but it couldn't be with a retirement trigger for payment of points.
So we're down to one point model, or are we still looking at multiple
There's
options?
another way to do it, but that would not use retirement as the trigger for the payment of points. We'll discuss both of the options with the committee, but there's a difference as far as the economics of it.
Okay.
And then I think WRS also had certain triggers you could use were age or years of service, but you couldn't use leaving, which is retirement
Correct.
as a trigger.
And we were
And
gonna
so-
share, Dave, we were gonna share the results with the committee. That was the direction that we were gonna go back with. There is a version of it that could work, but it would be with a slightly different intent than what was originally determined. The trigger cannot be the act of retiring. The trigger could be an age, the trigger could be years of service, but the trigger can't necessarily be me putting in a retirement letter and saying that I'm going to retire. That's the way the WRS is interpreting it at this point. So it could be rewritten in a different way so that a retirement agreement is not the trigger, but it would slightly change the intent of what we were looking at.
So it is going back to the points committee for
It's going
discussion,
back to
so,
the points committee
and
for-
further deliberation.
Correct, and then it'll come back here.
Okay. Any other questions on the notes? Okay, on to consent agenda. You will see several items, including approval of some handbooks, checks, finance. The only changes to what's on this consent agenda are the names that were added to the HR recommendations. And we can have a motion to approve all of what's on the consent agenda, or else we'll put something out for special, separate consideration.
Motion to approve.
The entire? Okay.
I'd like to ask, just further discussion.
We can have further discussion on individual items, when we have the motion, or did you want to pull it?
It doesn't have to be pulled. I just want to ask.
Okay, yeah, but we'll do that after the motion. Yep, okay, there's a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, discussion.
Oh, I just had a question on the youth options thing again. Someone requested to go into intro to biology, which my understanding is we have AP biology in the high school. AP biology counts for most introductory biology, and I just never do understand why we do that when we do that.
There was an answer to that, and I'm just gonna find it, Julie, for a minute. What I found with some of these, Julie, and I went back, there was a couple other ones that kind of sparked my, like exploring French was one that was in there
Yeah.
too. And I looked back, the student in that situation had already taken 4 years. This is a young lady who I believe is gonna be a junior next year. She's already gone through French 4. So sometimes what I'm seeing as the descriptor as far as what the course is and what our experience of what they've done in high school aren't lining up. Because that one jumped up. Rebecca and I were going through these and we went back and looked, well, the Exploring French was the one that jumped out at me. I didn't look up specifically the one with regards to the,
There's actually two. There's a prep for basic biology, and then there's another student with intro to biology, which to me,
Yeah.
we have AP bio. I don't understand.
and one of the things that I've seen is that that's,
Prerequisite or something.
It's a health sciences.
It's a, and I understand what your question is specifically, Julie, because it's with regards to kind of the levels that they would place into based on their next level here. And I know that that's like a 113.
Maybe I don't have my computer
Right.
died, so,
Yeah.
but I did have a question, I think it's the same strand, was that the one with the 4 classes?
Yeah.
Because at one of them, number 5, totaled 20 credits.
Yeah.
Yeah. What they do is they put down any
Or-
classes that they would be interested in taking in the event that it doesn't
But then they're
fit.
still
And then
limited to
they'll
the
see,
math. so-
they'll
Yeah,
see what
Many
fits,
times
but-
they won't be taking all those classes.
Okay.
In many respects, they're trying to take one class, maybe 2. They're trying to fit them into their schedule. But there is a vetting of that, Julie, with our administration, looking at also some of their placement pieces of where they are appropriately placed and the courses. That's what I can share with you. So they are reviewed with respect to the youth options requirements, and that is what's allowable for them to apply for.
And are these dual credits then, or are they strictly
These are strictly
post-secondary
college
credits?
classes. These are for kids who are taking a class at Madison College,
Right,
at the
okay.
UW specifically. It's their class, they attend the class there. It's not dual credit. And then we pay for that per the youth options requirements.
My question has to do with and maybe because we've had some new folks that are not involved in this, but the forms not having all the boxes checked before it comes to the board for approval, and specifically, you know, like the student is approved to enroll for these courses marked, you know, like there's I mean, there's usually something that
Can you show
indicates
me
that
what?
it's, well, sometimes this box saying yes is filled in before it comes to the board. You know, which says it says this section is completed by district, and there's a signature required from the board. But then there are also boxes above that indicate that somebody has looked at this and approved enrollment in these courses. and
Right.
they're not checked.
And that falls under the school board approval section, so once
So it
it's
won't be
approved,
checked until
it
we
won't
pass
be
it.
checked until it's, sometimes they'll go through and maybe check them ahead of time pending approval, but that's the section that falls under. So I'm guessing that's why it's not
Okay,
checked
because
that way.
maybe it's just come in different ways.
I mean, what I can share with the board is that our high school administration, along with their counselors, take a look at the courses that the kids are putting forth, and they need to have that level of review before they come forward to the board.
And I apologize for carrying on, but a question that it just hit me with this one is, so who determines whether they get the class at MATC or at the UW?
The student.
Student does.
Because there's clearly got to be cost differential.
Sure.
And so if there were a course offered at MATC that they could get, that they want at the UW, we cannot dictate that they have to take the lesser expensive?
No, this is a program where they're able to apply to that institution.
Okay.
And then I don't believe it allows for that level of,
School district
yeah.
scrutiny.
correct. Tim, do you have something that you wanted to add to that?
Well, you know, these came in as youth options where you do have kind of a minimal level of ability to
Right.
approve or deny if it's gone through the hoops. In all of these cases, these students, with the exception of that one with the music theory, all of these students have exhausted our local courses. I mean, they took AP, biology, and biotech as juniors, Julie. So in the life sciences.
But that's the same class. Intro to biology and AP bio, that generally, if you pass AP bio, you skip out of intro to biology.
And if they, for the youth options, we could apply, I think it's the 70% test. Kids could also just as easily apply through course options, and then we don't have any denial at all. So
We're taking too much time.
Right.
We've decided Brian gets to decide that, guidance counselors get to decide that, so we should be out of it. It's still, I wish we were more aggressive on it. I wish we were actually encouraging kids to take college classes then. If that's what they want to do, then let's make it something different than what we already gave them 90% of, but.
That point taken.
Yes, Dave.
Two quick things. One, looking at the AP and the POs, on the AP, there was like some items that are way over $5,000, like H&R carpet. How come that doesn't go on the 5,000 PO?
It should be on both. I can write that down.
But there were several I found like that. I mean, I was just wondering if there was some sort of reason. I mean, some things like the phone bill, I get it. You know, that's a monthly bill. It wouldn't be under the 5,000 PO. But things like H&R carpet and stuff like that, seems
Okay,
like
so
it would be.
one possibility might be the timing difference, because it could be a purchase order 1 month and then paid the next. So it's possible that when you
It was
actually
close to
would
the
see
beginning of
the
the month.
payment, it may actually be on a previous list, but
Okay, that's
it
possible.
should be on both though, so I can double check on that.
The other one was reimbursement for the 15-16 girls hockey to Sun Prairie. There's 2 of them in there under the same PO number, and it's the exact same amount. One at the beginning of the month, one at the end of the month. And I'm just going, did we pay it twice, or is really girls hockey reimbursement close to $19,000? Which it might be, I don't know. I was just kind of surprised to see the exact same amount in the same month.
I will have to look into that, thank you. I don't know the answer to that without checking. So I can definitely look into that.
That was it.
Any other questions or comments? On the consent agenda, not the motion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. There's a form that's been going around for the staff listening sessions. Has everybody had a chance to sign up to what they think they might be able to attend? Once again, the staff listening sessions, we like to have at least 2, no more than 3 board members at each one. If one individual could please submit some notes from the session. That would go to Rebecca, and then she can compile them, and then forward it to me, and I'll just do a recap. Or we can talk about how we want to handle that, but that way everybody has an opportunity to see what was discussed. I will send out, I do know that I've sent an announcement letter out to staff, so I'll take care of that for you, so.
Okay.
And then we'll just get information from Gary when he gets back, so. Okay, thank you everyone for considering, and I know some of us put our names down many times as fillers, but hopefully we have enough coverage so that will be done. I know staff really appreciates these. Okay, future agendas and meetings. We've already scheduled some, but are there any others that we want to?
I don't think so tonight. I do want to talk about a budget committee, but we might as well wait till Gary's back. We can talk about that next Monday when we're all together again. We'll schedule that sometime beginning of November. But right now, we have the annual meeting next week. We have a special meeting on the 24th, which we've already approved. We have HR meeting on the 19th with the WTA, and we have a policy committee on November 3rd. So,
Did you want to do anything with goals for helping?
oh, yes, I do want to do goals. That would be great. If we could look at a goals committee. Hey Kurt, can I have you look at your schedule too for a goals committee?
It's going to be Julie, myself.
We
and
looked
Gary.
at something that.
This will be to discuss that public community linkage meeting dialogue on
Yeah.
ALDA.
And we'll talk to some of our, if we can get a date tonight, then we can see who can attend, and if we can change it next week if we need to. We could, I mean, anything that week of the 24th or the week of Halloween,
27th
20,
is the only night I have free, the week of the 24th. Unless you want to talk the 28th, I can. Most people don't.
No. We have a special board meeting at 6 o'clock on the 24th. I mean, is it possible to
we could do it.
meet before then? Well, I don't know, it depends on,
I have
if there's
another-
other staff
I
members.
have another meeting right at 4, so.
Okay, sorry.
we could
Okay, so
do-
you're saying the 27th then?
We could do
That's
that.
the only one I could do. That week.
What about the week of Halloween? We have a policy committee at 5 on the 3rd.
You want to do it right after that? That shouldn't be very long.
That work, Kurt, on the 23rd, if we did like 6 o'clock? Let's do that.
Okay.
Does that work-
23rd?
Does that work for you, Julie?
November
It's
3rd.
November 3rd, I'm sorry.
5 o'clock?
November 3rd, which is a Thursday, that work? 6 o'clock?
6 o'clock?
Yep,
I can do
perfect, thank you for reminding me of that, Peggy. Perfect. That's all I got.
Okay, no other business, no need to go into closed session. A motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Dave, seconded by Joan. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Motion carried. Thank you.
excellent, thank you all.
9:30.
If anybody has their feedback forms, you can just give those to Rebecca.
Oh, yes, please, Randy handed out some feedback forms.
And please take some more cookies.
Oh, cookies. Oh, yes, Rebecca brought cookies for